or controversy. He's speaking about someone whose story changed the course of human history, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The crowd leans in as Gibson, known for his intensity, begins with calm sincerity. You think you know greatness until you study the life of this man. The hall falls silent. The more I read about him, he continues, the more I realized he wasn't just a religious leader. He was a man who transformed hearts, built nations, and redefined what mercy truly means. His voice echoes with respect, not performance. He says, in a world full of kings, warriors, and philosophers, he stood alone, not claiming power, but teaching humility, not demanding loyalty, but inspiring love. People watch in awe. This isn't the Mel Gibson they expected. This is a man reflecting deeply on truth. He recounts the Prophet's early life, how he grew up orphaned, yet carried himself with dignity that even his enemies couldn't deny. He lived in a time of chaos, Gibson says, but instead of becoming a product of his world, he became the light that changed it. He pauses, looking straight into the camera. What kind of person forgives those who tried to kill him? What kind of leader prays for the people who rejected him? The audience feels the weight of every word. When I read that he was called the trustworthy even before his prophethood, it struck me. Integrity came before revelation. That's rare. That's divine. Gibson speaks of how the Prophet's message wasn't about control, but liberation, freeing the soul from arrogance, greed, and ignorance. He taught people that power means nothing if it isn't used for justice, Gibson says softly. He didn't build empires of gold, but a community of faith and equality. He quotes the Prophet saying, the best among you are those who are best to their families. I've worked with men who had fame, money, everything, Gibson adds, but none had that kind of love in their homes. The audience nods, many wiping silent tears. His life wasn't easy, Gibson continues. He faced loss, betrayal, and war, yet never lost his peace. That's not human will, that's divine strength. Reporters begin typing frantically, knowing the world will explode once these words air. He explains how the Prophet's legacy isn't measured by monuments, but by hearts that still live by his message 1,400 years later. No man in history has been followed by billions every day in prayer, Gibson says. That kind of devotion doesn't come from fear, it comes from truth. He speaks of how the Prophet taught compassion even for animals, patience with the poor, and respect for women at a time when society offered them none. If the world truly studied him, Gibson says, they'd find the blueprint of humanity. His tone grows emotional. As a filmmaker, I've told stories of heroes, of men who stood for justice. But when you study Muhammad, you realize he wasn't acting out justice, he was justice. The room remains frozen in reverence. The more I read his words, the more I saw how modern the message is, he says. He spoke of equality long before human rights existed. He taught unity when the world was divided. And most of all, he taught that peace begins within your heart. Gibson leans back, his voice trembling slightly. You know, he says, I've seen the darkness of the world, war, greed, ego. But when I read about the Prophet, I felt something I haven't felt in years, hope. Cameras capture his every word. Maybe it's time, he says softly, for humanity to look beyond labels and rediscover the truth he carried, that we're all servants of one Creator. The hall erupts in applause, not for the celebrity, but for the courage of truth. For a moment, even Hollywood feels sacred. Mel Gibson, a man who once filmed stories of warriors and redemption, is now speaking about the greatest story ever lived, the life and legacy of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The next day, headlines around the world erupted. Mel Gibson speaks about Prophet Muhammad. Hollywood legend praises Islam's messenger of peace. News anchors replayed the clip endlessly, each word echoing through millions of screens. But this time, it wasn't controversy or scandal driving the discussion. It was curiosity and something deeper. People were stunned to hear one of Hollywood's boldest voices speak with such humility, reverence, and insight. In an exclusive interview later that week, Gibson sat calmly and said, "You can't study truth and stay the same. The life of Prophet Muhammad changes you, not through miracles of the supernatural, but through the miracle of his character." He described how during his research he expected to find political stories, perhaps even myths, but what he discovered was real humanity. He smiled at his enemies. He forgave when he had every reason for revenge. He lived simply, slept on the ground, ate what little was available, and yet ruled hearts. The interviewer asked him what impressed him most. Gibson paused, then said his mercy. Imagine this, a man who could have destroyed those who hurt him, instead chose to forgive them. That's not weakness. That's the highest form of strength. He mentioned the Prophet's return to Mecca, when after years of persecution, he forgave his former oppressors. He didn't come with vengeance, he came with peace, Gibson said. You don't see that in modern leadership. The world could learn from that moment alone. Viewers online flooded the comment sections with emotion. Muslims shared verses from the Quran. Non-Muslims wrote that they were inspired to read more about Islam. Gibson continued in his next speech. The Prophet didn't build cathedrals or statues, yet his name is remembered by billions every single day. That's divine impact. He spoke about how the Prophet's message of oneness, La ilaha illallah, carries a spiritual weight that transcends culture. It's not about religion alone, he said. It's about aligning your soul with truth. Journalists began noting how different Gibson's tone was, not preaching, not political, but deeply reflective. When I read the Prophet's farewell sermon, Gibson said, it struck me as the most powerful speech in history. He declared that all humans are equal, Arab and non-Arab, black and white, rich and poor. Tell me, who else spoke like that 14 centuries ago? His words resonated with millions. On social media, the clip was shared with the caption, "Even Hollywood can't ignore truth." Gibson went further, describing how Islam's simplicity fascinated him. One God, one message, one purpose, it's pure. No middlemen, no idols, just you and your Creator. He spoke about prayer as a discipline, fasting as self-control, charity as love in action. It's not just faith, he said, it's a way of restoring balance in a chaotic world. He admitted that before studying Islam, he believed the media narrative, but now he sees how distorted that image was. I realized Islam doesn't divide, ignorance does. The Prophet united tribes that were killing each other for centuries. He gave them a reason to live for something higher than themselves. The hall grew quiet again as Gibson added, "You know what shocked me most? He never claimed greatness. He said, I am only a servant of God." Can you imagine the most influential man in history calling himself a servant? For a moment, Gibson's voice softened. That humility, it's something our world has forgotten. The audience felt the truth in his tone. This wasn't acting. This was transformation. Gibson concluded, the life of Muhammad isn't a story of the past. It's a reminder of what humanity can still become. Honest, compassionate, fearless in truth. And with that, the world began to see something rare. Not a Hollywood star promoting a film, but a soul speaking light into darkness. By the following week, Mel Gibson's words had turned into a global movement of reflection. Universities began holding open talks about the Prophet Muhammad's message. Churches and mosques both quoted his lines about mercy, and people across cultures started sharing moments of connection that transcended religion. Gibson was invited to a world forum in Geneva, where scholars, journalists, and leaders gathered, expecting a celebrity soundbite, but receiving a sermon of sincerity. He stood before the crowd, the hall silent, except for the echo of cameras clicking, and began softly. When I first spoke about the Prophet Muhammad, I didn't plan to make headlines. I was searching for peace. I found it in his story. His voice carried a calm authority. I read how he treated the poor, how he honored women, how he valued learning, and how he forgave those who wronged him. And I realized he wasn't just a leader of Muslims, he was a leader of humanity. The audience leaned in. Gibson continued, in Hollywood, we celebrate heroes for fiction, but here was a man who lived truth. No wealth, no armies, no fame, yet he changed the moral direction of the world. He paused, then said, every time I read his teachings, I feel like I'm reading something alive, something eternal. Journalists who once criticized him now wrote about his spiritual clarity. A young woman in the audience stood and asked, what made you believe his message wasn't just history? Gibson smiled gently. Because it still works. Look at Muslims today, 5 times a day. Billions turn to one direction, one creator. The Prophet united their hearts across color and continent. That's not history. That's living truth. He spoke of his visit to a mosque in Los Angeles, where he saw men and women of all backgrounds standing shoulder to shoulder in prayer. No status, no superiority, just surrender, he said. That's what the Prophet taught. His words hit differently. They weren't from a scholar, but from a man who had lived in the heart of fame, seen the emptiness of excess, and now found meaning in simplicity. The Prophet showed us that power isn't control, it's compassion. Strength isn't pride,